Welcome, folks. We'll give it a few minutes while people join. I know folks are coming from the expo and from the networking sessions. So I'm playing a little bit of music while we wait. So I'll give it like about 2 to 3 minutes, and then we'll get started. All right, we'll get started in a few more minutes. I know folks are still coming in from the expo and from the networking sessions. So if you have any questions to start off, please feel free to add them into the chat. There's also a Q&A function. And I also added a poll. So if you can take the poll, I would love to get your thoughts on that. And while we wait, I'll let you guys do that, and then we'll jump into it. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Joseph, I see you dancing. Okay. Love it. Well, I'm excited. We'll let this song finish, and then we'll get started. Some favorite artists and songs. That is a great question. I listen to everything. I'm from Mexican descent, so rancheras are my favorite. Love it, love it. All right, let me go ahead and turn my camera on. All right, so we'll go ahead and turn this down. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome. And thank you for joining this session. Let me actually. All right, so my name is Jesus Vidari. I am a senior technical recruiter here for an organization called U.S. Digital Service. So you may have found us here in the expo throughout the summit here. And today I'm bringing you a very hot topic, really, and one that I've been passionate about for a number of years. So just to kind of start off with an introduction and getting to know me a little bit. Keep in mind, this is an open discussion. This is like fireside chat style. So, please feel free to put in your questions. And closer to the end of the conversation here, I would love to get some folks onto the stage and share your perspectives on what I'm about to share. And yeah, so if you have any questions, like I said, put them in the chat. I also have a poll that I'm running right now, just to get just kind of gauge the audience a little bit. and I promise it ties into the whole conversation. So again, who am I in this whole situation and conversation, right? So as I mentioned, I'm a technical recruiter, but I didn't start off in that field. So I probably kind of take it back a little bit more, and really, I think this is relevant to the discussion as well, and just share a little bit more of my personal history as well. So I come from a family of immigrants myself. Both my parents are from Mexican descent. They came here in the late '80s, and they have been working in agriculture ever since. So my dad's been working in the tomato fields for almost 30 years, and my mother got out of the agriculture industry, and works as just housekeeping and cleaning, and humble jobs, and in their opportunities that they the things that they did and the opportunities that they took to put food on the table for our family are the reasons that I'm at where I am in this point of my career. And those experiences have really humbled me. But a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, or what I want to highlight, is just really some of the disparities that we tend to see within the Hispanic Latino community. And so the poll that I pose in the poll that I posed here, really, is one that I want you to think about. So the question really stems from, what were we told when we were kids, right? What did our parents say? What did our tias and tios say? What did our grandparents say? In terms of what careers we should take, right? And if you identify with the Latino Hispanic community, chances are they probably told you to be one of the options that I told you there, other than technology. So just think about that for a second. Just think about what you were told when you were a kid growing up, and did you actually become that? Right? Is that the field that you actually went into, or did you go into something completely different? So keep those in mind as we go out through today's discussion. But again, a couple of the main topics that I want to discuss today is really the gap and disparity in terms of Latino Hispanics, specifically in technology roles, and what barriers or what obstacles have been put in place to either limit folks from getting into technology roles, or lack of resources thereof, not just within society, but also within our own families, within our own culture, and even within ourselves, right? As we begin to navigate our own careers, what obstacles do we place on our own path to get to where we want to get to? So I want to start off really by just highlighting some data points, just so you can kind of get some context, begin to understand, where these things stem off of, because I'm not just making this up, right? There is data to support a lot of these disparities and a lot of these gaps, as we should call them, specifically as it relates to technology, and not just Latino Hispanics, but most people of color, including the Black and African American community. And I'll start off by just giving you some high level and then bringing it down into the technology scope. So first and foremost is the Latinx representation in the U.S. So I just want you to imagine and understand this to begin with. So according to Pew Research data, uh, currently the Latino Hispanic population is well over 60 million people. That's almost 20% of the U.S. population, right? Now, as we begin to look at the power that the Latino dollar has, the Latinx community dollar, you're talking almost $1 trillion by 2023, and this is through the Nielsen DIS report. By 2023, the buying power in the U.S. of the Latino Hispanic community is going to be well over 1.9 trillion dollars. That's the gross domestic product of Australia, Spain, and Mexico combined. So just the Latino population in the US has more buying and purchasing power than three other countries. So just think about that for a second. And what that means in terms of corporate organizations and others that have to work, or their customers are the Latinx community, right? Um, and the next piece is really just diving into technology itself and where these gaps are. So according to Brookings, less than 7% of the Latinx workforce is represented in STEM related careers. So this is technology, science, math. So any roles that are within the STEM community, less than 7% of that in the US, according to the Latinx workforce, is derived from that. And it's far less the higher you climb up the corporate ladder. So we're talking C-level roles. If you're a startup founder, that number is even less than that, right? So there's obviously a big gap, a big disconnect here. And what do we do to solve that? Like, where do we go from here, right? Um, so I want to start off with one main topic, and that's talking about um, the issues and where they stem from. So I want to start with family, right? So going to the poll that we had here, I'll just tell you a quick anecdote. When I was a kid, my parents, like I said, both of them had agriculture jobs, so they had no idea what technology was. I think at that time, like, Facebook wasn't even around. We barely had the internet. And so, these weren't discussions that we were even having, right? In terms of like what job you should take. And usually the ones that they did know were, oh, become a doctor, become a lawyer, right? These are things that most of my family told me. And we all know that both of those tracks are very difficult to kind of go through. And so there's a lot of pressure when people tell you, hey, you got to be a doctor or you got to be a lawyer. And even then it's like, do you really want to be that? Right. Um, and so I think a lot of these thoughts are put into us, these pressures, at least in the Latinx Hispanic community, because that's how I identify, and my own experience relates to that, is that these pressures as we grow up kind of accumulate, right? And so you graduate high school, you get to college, and you're trying to pick a degree, and so you say, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna go biomed because my dad or my mom told me to be a doctor. And so you tend to take that, you go through that process, and then you find out once you get the degree that that's not where you want to be. So you end up not going to graduate school. Maybe you're trying to take you're trying to take the test to get into medical school, and you don't really get there, and then you end up switching careers, right? And so a lot of that again is derived from the cultural pressures, or the familial pressures, and even what that means to your family in terms of success. So it's not just about, hey, you got to be a doctor or a lawyer, but now it's okay. Even if you do get to that point, there's other pressures in terms of financials, and, oh, you got to give back to the family, and you got to do this and that to support everyone else, right? So I think a lot of that pressure is derived from our families. And so to bring that back into the technology scope, um, you know, a lot of the reasons that I believe that, we don't, at least in the Latino Hispanic community, don't actually get into technology is because of that pressure of, oh, you got to be a doctor or you got to be a lawyer. And so, I mean, I would, at this point, I'd love to bring somebody on stage, anybody who maybe identifies with that situation, or maybe has a different story. Maybe they're in a different community. Maybe they're Black African American community, or in a different community entirely, and would like to share an anecdote on that, or just in general, like, maybe, is that what you were told when you grew up, or were you told something different? So I would love to get somebody on stage if you want to, or we can just answer in the chat if anybody wants to say something on the chat. And I believe there's an option down at the bottom. All right, we got some folks here in the chat. Let me see. Yeah, if you want to share, there's actually there's an opportunity for you to select to share your screen, and then I'll bring you onto the stage. All right, looks like we have Jason coming on. Hi, Jason.
Hey, good. Thanks for hosting this. I'm really excited to join. Yeah, I do have some connection points. I'm originally from Miami. My dad's a Cuban immigrant. His sister was a doctor. He ran a catering business in Hialeah. And something you get when you're growing up is, he always says, hey, I want you to do this. You got to do this. It's going to make you money. It's going to be good. And it's a lot of pressure from from the dad side, right? That's kind of like in the Latin community, kind of like the head father figure, right? And so I was able to get out of it. My brother, he's pressuring my brother to go to law school, which he's kind of interested in, but he does get pressure from it sometimes. And I think it's important to not break out of that, but understand that it's kind of a different era that we're going in where it's a lot more freedom to do different things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, thanks for sharing that. And that's, that's one example, right, of what I just mentioned, where like we have those pressures of being something that sometimes you might not even want to be. Or you're indoctrinated into this thought that like, oh, you know what, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a doctor. And then you get to school, you take chemistry, and then you take, bio, and you're like, wow, this is not what I want to do at all, right? And you waste all this time and money to get this degree, and then you just end up switching careers. So we got. I love that perspective. Thank you for sharing. I got Joe on here, and then I got Catherine. I would love to get both of your perspectives.
I'm happy to share. I think definitely same as you. I came from a family where they all went to med school back in Mexico. So when they came here, of course, they want to bring that same and instill that same dream in the children that they are raising. And I was on the same mission. I luckily had some help along the way. I even, still went and decided to be a comms major, and I went into tech, but I chose, still routes that didn't truly fulfill my desire and my dream. So I went into sales actually because I said, hey, mommy and papi, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to provide back for all of you here. But sales, even in that role, I was not happy. I was miserable. There would be times where I would just say, you know what, this isn't what I want to come and do, even if I did land in tech. But it's also one of those things where, similar situations where others of us are the first to join tech as a first generation, and we're trying to even explain our own roles. I think that's always a curious conversation to have, especially with the holidays coming up. So I know we all have that, but I think for myself, luckily I was able to land in a role. And I think it's taken me a while to explain what I do, particularly in this tech space now. But my parents, I think they're appreciative and they understand that, I just was no longer happy. I wasn't going to be happy as a doctor or in sales, but as long as I am happy now, then that's all they really care about. So it took a little bit, but definitely feel and hear from all of you here. So I'm glad we had a space in this summit and even the opportunity in this session to chat about it here.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just quickly add, I think a lot of that has to do with like a generational shift, I believe. Right. And it's because, like our parents, like, especially like, I'll give you my example, right? Like both my parents, come in here, like my mother lived in the mountains of Mexico, like in Hidalgo, and my dad is like closer to the border. And so like my mom didn't even have electricity, like up until like her late, 18, 20 years old and during her time. And so, let alone the internet, right? So a lot of that in their mind is like, oh, okay, well, I don't understand this. I don't understand this. Like, you could tell me all day long what you do, but as long as you're happy, mijo, as long as you're happy, mija, like, it is what it is. Sometimes before that, especially with older generations, I think, when I look back at like some of my cousins who are like in their 30s and 40s, right, they're kind of like, Gen X and just before the millennial stage, that in between, they I feel like that they were pressured more into like following in their footsteps. So like, hey, if we own a restaurant, like I want you to own the restaurant right after. Or hey, like, like one of my cousins, my uncle was one of the main like farmers there, and so he told my cousin, hey, I would like you to take the buses and these are yours, and now I want you to take over the farm, once we're done. But it's like, did he really want to do that, right? He could have chosen to go to school and maybe done something completely different, but he was already told, he was already given, saying, hey, you're gonna be doing this, when you turn 18 or when you're old enough to manage it on your own. So I appreciate you sharing that. So thank you for coming on stage. And then Joe and Sarah, and I got one more person coming in, and then we'll go ahead and move on to the next topic. Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay. So I'm Puerto Rican, and I have kind of a different experience myself. I definitely was encouraged. I think it has to do with being a Latina for sure. I was definitely encouraged to go into the social sciences and the humanities, become a teacher. I'm actually just entering tech now. Making that legible to my family in the last 6 months has been hard. But I think kind of the expectations for Latinas are definitely different sometimes. We're not
Mhm.
expected to be doctors and lawyers. We're expected to be wives and teachers. So I think it's really interesting to hear the differences in perspectives here.
Yeah, that's a deep conversation, right? When you start talking about just the Latinx Hispanic culture as it relates to like machismo and like, the roles that even gender plays within the Latinx Hispanic community, I think are significant even in the career paths that we take, right? And that ties closely to not just family, but just the culture in general, right? And even sometimes like, because some countries are different than others, from that sense in the perspective of the Latinx community. And I think that's a good point to bring up, right? Is that like sometimes there's those aspects of like, the perspectives of what gender roles are played within our community. So no, thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to talk about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Joe, you want to add anything, my fellow colleague?
Fatima, are you on? Sure. So I happen to be the son of an immigrant of Jewish descent. My mom actually survived the Auschwitz death camp. And being older than y'all, I'm one of the baby boomers. So there was no internet, but I could definitely relate to you. Going to college was like I had no choice. I had to go to college, and I wasn't really college material, and kind of was forced through. And my path, strayed, away from that. And I really appreciate your talk. Thanks, Jesus.
Thank you, Joe. Let's see if Fatima, are you there? In and out. All right, we'll take one more. I'll take Darnell here, and then hopefully Fatima can join us.
How's it going, Jesus?
Hey, Darnell.
How are you doing?
I'm well.
I feel like I haven't seen Joe in like literally 10 minutes.
So yeah, so anything you want to add to this particular topic, or any anecdote that you would like to share?
Sure. So my half of my family came from Panama. So yeah, there was a lot of I guess a lot of pressure there to a lot of pressure to learn music, obviously become a classical musician, obviously learn church music. And then also there was always that pressure of being like a doctor or lawyer. And I think ultimately a lot of our parents and grandparents that came uh, from be it uh, be it like Mexico or Puerto Rico, anywhere that they came, they wanted us to do better, but I don't think they phrase it in the best of ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think they saw being a doctor or a lawyer as the pinnacle of success, but they never realized that there are other things that you can do out there to make money. So that was a one thing. And then as growing older and realizing that I don't have to appease them. I just have to do what supports myself and my family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you bring an excellent point, right? It's what is a perception of success within our families, right? And I think you mentioned that in terms of, like the doctor or the lawyer was like the pinnacle of success, and for the most part, it still is, right? Anytime you get to that point, like you go through a lot of schooling to get to that point, so it's well earned. But what about software engineers? What about business owners, right? What about all these other roles that are out there? Not just technology. I mean, even like in the finance space, right? Like becoming a CFO. Like you never think about becoming a CFO or like a financial, a person that runs finances. Like, those are all major roles that are not, they're not the traditional like, oh, like that's what I want to be, or that's what I've been told I want to be. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
And then did we ever get Fatima on? No.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
Okay. Technology, love it. Thank y'all for having this discussion. I didn't realize we're going in deep. I really appreciate
That's how I
this.
like to roll, Fatima.
I'm learning, I'm liking. I think kind of what Darnell said a little bit really also resonates with me. And then kind of from my filter, and I say filter because sometimes we wear different hats. In our culture, Latinx, particularly me as being an immigrant with parents also being immigrants and a woman of color, there are certain stereotypes and roles that also were integrated into bringing myself up and that expectation of success. And as Darnell kind of touched on, not necessarily in the most positive or reassuring or supportive way. And that created a lot of, trauma, a lot of just insecurities, and definitely imposter syndrome for sure, like deep imposter syndrome. Especially when now you're coming home and you're like, well, mom, I'm not going to be a doctor, or dad, I'm not, or whoever your parents are, grandparents,
How
whatever,
do you
whoever's
explain that to
raising
them, right?
Yeah, it's like, I'm not going to be what you wanted me to be, but I'm going to be something in tech, and I'm the only woman of color in the room, or the only person who represents the Latinx community in the room. And as you hire in your career, you are less and less kind of a single. I mean, not less and less, you are more and more a single. And the pressure that you're balancing to succeed and to integrate yourself and to learn and to, again, advance in your own career and your own things that you want to do. I mean, it's a lot. I think seeing and talking to somebody throughout that process, finding a mentor, a psychologist, a counselor, someone that you can talk to, and creating a support group around you is very important. So that has been something that I feel has helped me in my success. But I appreciate this conversation, Jesus.
Yeah.
Really, it's much needed, and I'm excited to meet all the amazing, talented people out there. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for just sharing your piece, and I think you brought up a lot of good points. It's actually a very good segue into the next really the next focus point of this discussion. I hit on the family and cultural pieces, and here I'll let you join back the audience, but feel free to join back on, Fatima. So, and then Flora, I know you're waiting, so I definitely like to get you on stage. So hold your thought. And then I'll open it back up, and I definitely like for folks to come back on and share some perspectives. But one of the things that Fatima said, and I think is a really good point, is the barriers that society has placed on us, right? And I won't hit on it too much because I think we all know, and it's pretty obvious, right, that there aren't a lot of Latinos and Latinx Hispanic individuals, professionals in technology. Like that's obvious. The numbers are out there. The data's out there. And so, it's really just understanding those barriers and figuring out how do we overcome them, right? So first of all, we just got to understand what tools and resources do we have in place. And so, I think from the perspective of society as a whole, I think we just need to do a better job of really helping. And this is where it even ties back into the community as a whole in the Latinx culture. We tend to have these conversations of well, and it's very prevalent in the Latinx Hispanic community, and it's unfortunate, but it's almost like, okay, you got to a very successful role. Maybe you're the manager of an engineering department, or somewhere else. And this can apply to several other industries, but how often do you say, oh, I want to help the person next to me, right? And so, or I want to help my fellow Latino, Latinx, Hispanic colleague, without the fear of saying, oh, they might take my job, right? And that kind of ties into the culture, right? Where a lot of the times it's kind of like, oh, I'm gonna do what's best for my family. In this case, I'm gonna do what's best for for the folks here, and maybe not help that person too much to get to that point. And so we really need to shift that narrative, in my opinion. I think those conversations of oh, I don't want to help him because he's going to take my job. Like, no, it has to be the opposite of that. We need to help that person so that they can also be a leader in technology, so that we can, you know, move the needle, as I like to say, or increase the percentage points in terms of, you know, what I mentioned earlier, right? The data says less than 7% of the workforce, of the Latino workforce, or I should say, less than 7% of the workforce is Latino Hispanic colleagues, right? And I mentioned too that even far less than that are in leadership roles. And so, what are we doing to change those numbers? What are we? Are we helping our colleagues get to those leadership levels? Are we telling them, hey, like, I see you got a degree in this. Like, here's the best route to take if you want to be a security engineer, or here's the best route to take if you want to be a software developer, right? And so it's really having those deep conversations within your own communities to say, okay, like, I want to make sure that you're as successful as you can be. You need a mentor, right? I'm a director of engineering. Like, I have an hour a week. I'm willing to give to a fellow Latino, or, you know, Latina that, or Latinx individual that wants to, you know, that wants to pursue a career engineer, right? So taking advantage of those mentoring opportunities, taking advantage of all the resources that are out there. So joining groups like Techqueria, for example, right? And there's other groups out there, that foster community to ensure that we're moving the needle, to ensure that we're utilizing each other as a resource to, to influence that change, right? And to take advantage of those resources. So if they're offering free certifications, like, sign up for it. You know, don't fear that you may not get it, or that, you know, maybe it's not what you want to do. But if, hey, if it's free and if it's a certification, like, why not, right? Take a shot at it. So really utilizing all these resources, and ultimately what I like to say, and this is something that I've learned as being a technical recruiter, some conversations that I've had over the years with my managers and stakeholders that I've worked with. You know, there's always this constant, like, okay, well, how do we increase diversity in hiring? You know, sometimes it's not about what's available in the market. It's about how do we set up for the future, right? And how do we build the next round of engineers? So there's this constant, like, battle for talent, I like to say, of going to like a career fair, or going to, an expo or a convention, and saying, all right, I'm going to talk to as many engineers as possible and try to hire out of that pool. Well, why not go into the communities themselves? Why not go into the, you know, the high schools, the middle schools, you know, maybe other boot camps, and fostering those relationships to help those potential. I mean, they're going to join the workforce, right? Especially if they're in high school and in college, they're going to join the workforce in the next 4 to 6 years, right? And so, you know, it's not just about helping the talent that currently exists, but building the talent that is going to exist in a few years from now. So I feel like I'm ranting now, and I'm just preaching on here. So if anybody else wants to jump in, maybe they have something that they want to talk about in terms of just society, and just a bigger picture, right? You know, I would love to bring somebody else on stage if anybody else has an additional comment they want to add. I do have Flora on here that was waiting. So if you want to touch on the last subject, feel free to join. While I have Flora join, if anybody else wants to hop on, feel free to do so.
Hey, Jesus, are you able to hear me?
Hi, Flora. Yes, thank you for joining.
Okay, I wanted to touch base on the previous topic that we were talking about.
Yeah.
I am actually the oldest and only girl in my family. So it has been difficult for me actually creating that path and really breaking the barriers. I moved out of my house when I was 18, which is not the norm, which is within Mexican households, they really want the daughters to remain in the household until they get married. But I was not having that. I was like, you guys had me on a strict household growing up, not about to have that during college. So I moved out. They really didn't like that. Still don't like that to this day, but they're coming around for that.
Mm-hmm.
I also did not immediately go into college. I took a gap year as well. And then when I did go to college, I went to a community college and it was going well, but at the same time, it was taking a toll on my mental health due to certain events that were happening during those years. So what I did is I took a break after 2 semesters. and just focus on solely working. I worked in various industries. I went from a law firm to a hospital to a call center. So I was definitely just dipping my toe into every industry.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I moved to Georgia, which my parents from that point, they were like, oh no, we don't want you to go to Georgia. But I was like, you know what, it's time for me to really just make the move that I want at this point.
Yeah.
And I came to Georgia. Eventually, I found this program that is called Year Up. And it actually is focused on job training within the IT field and accounting. So during the year of the program, we do 6 months in a classroom and then 6 months in an internship, which thankfully, after the internship, I was offered a job and I seen that increase on my salary. I was like, oh my God. And trying to explain all this to my parents on how this was a blessing was very difficult because graduation day, I tried to explain my new role, project analyst, translate that in Spanish, really don't get a lot. So, in a way, right now, they're like, well, they're questioning where I'm going to apply those skills.
Yeah.
But I can say that I have, in a way, been challenging everything they have been telling me to do. I've been actually introducing trade school to my brother because I don't want them to pressure him. Okay, you need to go to college come next semester, or you need to go
Mm-hmm.
to a university and do this major. And I'm telling them, no, that's not the norm no more. Like, there are different programs out here. Some of them
Yeah.
are free, which I willingly share with my friends. And sometimes I feel like, in a way, they take it for granted because I do all this research. They come to me for the help. I do the research, give it to them. And then I see that they don't do anything with the research that I've done. So I have started to actually stop offering help, which sucks
Yeah.
because I enjoy helping other people. Like, I can legit, if I know my job has openings and I know you have the skills, I'll shoot you a text and I'll be like, yo, this job is just open. Let me go ahead and refer you, send you the link and everything. But it's like a lot of people are like, no, no, thanks. You know,
Yeah. You can only help so much.
like, okay, I guess, so now it's like, yeah, I'm at that point where it's like, okay, let me just focus on me now and see
Mm-hmm.
how I can help myself before really just helping other people at this point.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And thank you for sharing that. I mean, 2 points that you hit on there that I just want to go back to real quick. One is just the perspective of like there's way more options out there than just going to college. And you know, I was one of those. Like my parents were like, "Mijo, you got to get good grades, or else you won't get scholarships, or we don't have no way to pay for your college. So if you don't figure it out, then there's no way we can help you. But you got to go to college anyway, right? So it's like, okay, well then I guess I'm gonna maybe have to take out loans. I don't know, but
Yeah, and
but you
fast
know,
topic for them is very cliche because they think fast food, you're asking them to take out a loan for you. And my
yeah,
parents are like, no, I'm not signing no papers. And I
and
was
then they
like,
don't want you to take out a loan, right?
it's
so
just like,
so
how can I do this with no help from you guys? And you guys don't really want me to take out no loans. So I'm like,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. So there's that piece, and then another thing that you mentioned that I think really ties into the topic that I just or the focus that I just talked about, which is like just the societal and even cultural norms, is that those discussions are on salary. Like I know you mentioned like you kind of negotiated your salary. At least in my experience with the Latino Hispanic community, because I remember when I first got like my first career opportunity. And I didn't know how to negotiate, right? Like that wasn't something that, at least in the Latino Hispanic culture, it's kind of like you got to appreciate the little things. You got to take with what you can get. Like that's kind of like the the perspective that they give you, and especially your parents are like, oh, that's good enough, like $20 an hour, okay, like yeah, that's good, like you don't need more than that, don't ask for more, they're not gonna give you the job, right? So but I think that perspective, that narrative has changed a lot, and it really needs to, right? Because we all know that things are getting more expensive but it's not only that, it's just a matter of like what you're worth, especially if you bring a certain skill set, and so
Mhm.
fight for it. And that comes down to like not just salary negotiations, but like maybe you're at a company and you're trying to get that promotion. Like, speak up, because and here's the thing, like in the Latino Hispanic community, at least the one that I'm familiar with in my own experiences, and
Mhm.
my friends and colleagues that identify the same way, it's kind of like, well, why do you need a promotion? Like, you're doing great, like you're doing good, like don't make any noise, you're fine, like stay where you are. And it's kind of like, well, I want to progress, I want to become a manager, I want to become a team lead, I want to X, Y, and Z, right? Whatever that title is. And so, you're told that you're okay with staying where you are, but really you want to find ways to accelerate and advance in your careers. And I think that needs to change within our own perspectives and in our families, and even just like as a culture, right? Like as a community. So thank you for bringing those points up. So I'm gonna
Something
go ahead and bring
else that
up.
needs to change is the comparison. I'm not sure if anyone else can relate, but growing up, I was always used to hear, "Mira sus hijos of this person." And I would just be like, "Well, that's that person's child. Let me worry about my life,"
Yeah.
not knowing
Yep.
that
Yep.
the top secrets of whatever other kids are doing. But granted, I'm not gonna throw them under the bus.
Exactly. Exactly. No, well, thank you for bringing that up and just bringing those topic points up. I'm going to go ahead and bring up Jocelyn. Hopefully, I said that right.
You did. You got it.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'm gonna bring you back to the general stage here, Flora. So thank you so much, and then we'll bring up Jocelyn. All right. All right. So what you got for us?
Yeah, so I what really well, there's a lot of points that you've said that have really, really resonated with me. I'm loving all of this. This is my first year attending this, so it's been great. Um, for me, so with my parents, I grew up in a very rural area in the middle of the Midwest. Both of my parents also worked in agriculture, like yourself. They also, they're from Mexico, and so I'm like the first generation here. And I saw a lot of people pursuing jobs, whether that was like in agriculture or welding or like things of that nature, vocational schools, or there was the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Like you said, you got to be a doctor, you got to be a lawyer, or something like
Mhm.
this. And I think, especially right now, because of with my company, I'm actually part of the interviewing team. And one of the questions that we ask is, how do we get more Latinx people in here? How do we encourage that growth? And I always go back to, well, let's expand that a bit further. Like, how many of us did we see engineer, people, our peers becoming engineer? Like, how many
Yeah.
of us did we even know that was a thing? I didn't. I sure as heck didn't. Like, I went to college and I was going to study something else, and I came across, this field, and it's my passion, it's everything, but like I didn't see that. And I think reaching to that generation, after us, like it's like, yes, empowering the people that are currently in the workforce right now, but also like how can, we reach out to, like myself as a kid, kids like who live in areas like I grew up in. It's like you're never going to hear about STEM, and like, because honestly, my school didn't even offer those programs.
Yeah.
Like there was no exposure. And for me, like that's something, especially now, I've become a mom, I've grown up a bit, and I keep asking that question. It's like, us as a community, how do we plug into our schools, and especially in these areas where like they've never heard of this. Like a lot of times you can't picture yourself doing something when you've never seen anybody do it, or you don't know personally anybody in your realm that does that. And I don't know, I think that's also important. Not sure where I'm going with this. I just feel like,
No, I
that's
love it.
something that's needed, and I'm passionate about it, because I don't know, we can't pigeonhole ourselves into a certain, not there's anything wrong with certain occupations or anything like that, but just expanding that circle of like, what can we be, what spaces
Yeah.
can we move into? And I think that's very important as well.
100%. Everything you just said resonated with me, and especially when you mentioned like like what even now, like the community that I come from. So I mentioned this early in my presentation, but the hometown that I come from is called the Mockley, and it's like it's small farming community, like 10,000 people. There's a Seminole tribe there that kind of stands out. It's in the middle of the Everglades in Florida, and like the population there is like half of the folks there either work in the small businesses that are there, so like maybe local mom and pop shops, or in farming, right? Because we have tomatoes and oranges and watermelon that's grown there. Actually, like a large percentage of the tomatoes are actually grown out of there, believe it or not. But the fact of the matter is like kids there, like, you know, I mean, I joked earlier with one of my colleagues. I was like, most people, I mean, even growing up, like the closest Walmart was an hour away, let alone a large corporate organization that might have software engineers where people are being employed at, so that we can see that as kids, like that wasn't around, right? And so, and even to this day, those communities sometimes don't have that. So whose responsibility is it to expose those kids to that? It's our responsibility, right? It's this generation right now, this group of people that are becoming technologists, that want to become technologists, to spread the word. And like you said, it's not about taking away from other occupations. Every occupation is great. If you got a job, that's great, but it's ultimately like, are you being exposed to an opportunity that you know that you'll end up loving, right? And if you would have never known about it, then how? Or if you would have never been exposed to it, how will you ever find out about it and eventually get into that realm? And so I think the same thing goes for a lot of kids in our community. It's like, where where do they even begin to understand or familiarize themselves with occupations that otherwise aren't really visible to them? And so yeah, so to your point, I love it. I love what you said, and I think it's very valid in terms of why it's important for us to go back to our communities and to change that perspective. So yeah, I love that. All right, well, we're running on our last 15 minutes here, and I want to hit on one more point and then just open it up to general questions, and then I want to go to the poll real quick. But the last one really has to do with imposter syndrome. And Fatima actually mentioned this earlier, and I think this one's important because in this we can probably talk about this for like another hour, which I will try to limit it, but the last, I think, component as to why I feel that, especially in Latino Hispanic community, we don't get into tech, or may not get as far as we want to, is because I think we limit ourselves, right? We create these barriers in our own mind that we think that because my parents are farm workers, like, I can't, become the next Jeff Bezos or the next Elon Musk or, Bill Gates, like, that's not true, right? You whatever barriers you think that you're setting yourself on, are being created by yourself, right? And so you gotta, I mean, there's all kinds of ways that we can cope and that we can talk about in terms of trying to overcome imposter syndrome. But and for those that don't know what imposter syndrome means or what it is, it's really the ideology that you're not good enough to do something, even though you're completely qualified, right? Because one quote that I always that I love, and I've heard it multiple times, it's like, if you were brought in a room, it's because you're meant to be there, right? So if you're a professional and you got hired to do that job, it's because you're meant to be there. Like you have the skills, you have the aptitude, you have the ability to be successful in that role. So own it, right? So if you're a technologist, like, and you're coming in and you're like, oh, well, I only really have a year of software development experience. Well, what are you doing to enhance that, right? So like maybe you're doing some side projects, maybe you're leaning on your colleagues to teach you some newer skills, right? So you have the ability to better yourself in that role and to succeed. And so I think that conversation around imposter syndrome really just stems from, again, setting our own, limiting our own beliefs, right? That's the topic here. Is like we limit our own beliefs when we have these perspectives, and it's a lot, right? Because usually that imposter syndrome is derived from everything that we just talked about. It comes from family pressures, it comes from people telling you that you can't do something, or that maybe you're better off doing something else. And so you come you come with all this baggage of, okay, well, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. But again, that's not true. So I mean, again, I'll leave you with that quote of, if you're in a room, it's because you're supposed to be there. So that's just one quick thing that I want to bring up. I'd love to bring. I'm just going to open it up to the floor here, and if anybody wants to share about anything that I mentioned in terms of family, society, maybe imposter syndrome in yourself, any anecdotes. I'd love to use the last 10 minutes to share as many of those stories. And then, or if you want to ask me any questions, right, in terms of what I do or, how I grew up, or maybe just anything about the technology industry, from my perspective as a technical recruiter, I would love to answer those. So if you have questions, feel free to come up on stage or just ask them on the chat if you don't feel comfortable jumping on stage. I'd be more than happy to answer them. Oh, we got Joe coming back. Hey, Joe, welcome back.
Jesus, I'd be interested to know how you landed such a wonderful job with USDS. How'd you get in there?
All right, Joe, love it. Love the question. So I don't know. I mean, let's just say we got some incredible recruiters that do a good job of selling you on the work that we do here at USDS. So, folks here on the call, so Joe is actually one of my colleagues on the senior technical recruiting team, and one of our colleagues. I don't think she's on the event here today, but I got recruited by a recruiter, believe it or not, at USDS, and I'll quickly just say this. Like for me, I was kind of dumbfounded when I got asked to join USDS, like when I was recruited, so to speak, right? Because who would have thought that a kid from a community of 10,000 people where everybody's a farmer and the likelihood that you might be a farmer too is a real possibility to end up working for the White House. Like when I first got the job, it was kind of like, it was just like a wow moment, because a culmination of the past 7 years of what I've been doing in technical recruiting, and just kind of hit that epitome, right? It was like, wow, like I think I'm fine. I think I'm making it, like that was a perspective that I had in my mind. And, it was, even my wife just, supporting me throughout the whole process, and just hearing that, it was kind of like, it was like, okay, like, I feel like I'm more where I need to be. And not just that, but the mission that we have here at USDS, which is, we want to serve the greatest amount of people with the greatest amount of need, right? And that's what I'm hoping we do here. So, Joe, that was a great question. I loved it, and hopefully that was the right answer. I don't know, but anyway, yeah. If you're interested in the organization, we do have an expo booth here, or you can just direct message me, connect with me on LinkedIn. Be more than happy to take it offline. But thanks for that question, Joe. All right, Judith, welcome.
Hi, thank you. My name is Judith Ramirez, and I work at a company called Octane Lending. It's I work in product. It's actually the second tech company I've worked at, and I was just listening to a lot of the things people were saying, and it definitely resonated with me. I grew up in Los Angeles, went to high school in East LA, never heard about any kind of opportunity in like STEM or anything like that. Ended up going to college when I was 24. So I was about 28 when I graduated. So I'm starting a little bit later. But one thing that I think is really important, even if you get past some of those barriers that kind of are more in your mind and not knowing and not having awareness, is also management. Because I don't know if other people have experienced this, but who your manager is actually can really matter and make like a really big impact in your career. I have an absolutely amazing manager. I love him. Like, he advocates for me. He's always there for me and he supports me. But I've definitely had other managers in the previous company that I was at that weren't really there to support or help me. And one thing that we're talking about the company I'm at now is like mentorship and sponsorship. And right now, we currently have is like a committee that's made up of employees in product and engineering to talk about diversity and inclusion. And so we started having this discussion because we started talking about how even if you bring in people from diverse backgrounds or underrepresented groups, they're not staying in the tech industry, or they're not being promoted, which is also another thing that I think is really important to recognize, that even those that make it into a tech industry, they're not getting into, software engineer 2 or senior roles. The last company I was at, there was one girl, me and her were the only two Latinas in product, and she basically never did it. It took like 3 years for her to get promoted. Meanwhile, other people who started after her were getting promoted. And so you see these types of things, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience in like mentorship and sponsorship and, you know, like kind of the difference too, because, you know, with sponsorship, it's usually someone with like upper level management that can help you with like connections. And then, you know, a mentor could definitely be your manager, but also kind of, I guess, tactics or things you can do to help yourself besides advocating for yourself with your manager. But there are other ways that I think that is helpful to advocate when you
Yeah.
don't have a manager that's as supportive or as on board or personally invested in your career.
Love this question. And I can go a couple of different ways with this. First, you know, I'll share that, you know, I've been in that situation myself, right? Like I've come from previous employers where, um, like I was precisely that. I was like the only person, right? And so it wasn't only that, but like also just like growing up with that like mentality of like machismo, like I don't need help from anybody. Like, you know, you're kind of prideful, and it's kind of, especially when you're young, and you're like early career starter, and you just have this mentality that like it's okay, like I'll eventually get there. Um, you know, I think that limits us a lot in the community as well when we have that mindset of like it's okay, like I'll get there eventually, like I don't need anybody else's help if they're not willing to help me. But you got to humble yourself a little bit, and that's something that I learned over the years. And I'm not saying like I've been in the industry for 30 years, like, you know, I still got a lot of growing to do myself, right? But you know, you got to get to a point where first of all you got to humble yourself enough to accept the help or reach out to somebody who's willing to help you. So that's number one, is getting over that barrier, because I think a lot of people tend to have it, right? Especially when you're starting off. You tend to think that you know what you know, but there's other people that are smarter than you, and so you gotta gravitate towards those people. And there's tons of people out there that are willing to help you. So, you know, if you're looking for mentorship or sponsorship, you're right. Some of the, you know, there's some differentiations between the two, but I would say first and foremost, because sometimes mentorship is difficult unless you have somebody in mind, right? It's because I've actually done this a couple of times where like I've asked folks to be my mentors, and they're like, "Oh, I already have like 4 or 5 others that I'm mentoring," or hey, like, you know, yeah, let's just set some time, and then you just kind of start to fall off. So I think in terms of seeking that mentorship is first of all is finding that person that you can not only talk about professional stuff but personal stuff as well. So having that relationship, not just asking some random person to be your mentor, but asking somebody who you would feel comfortable with talking about both, you know, personal and professional things. And personal's up to you, but still, I mean, that translates to your success, right? So like if you're going to talk about, oh, how do I increase my salary, like that ties into your finances and you know, back home. But then the other piece too is not just, if you can't find that mentorship, is finding a community that is going to help you succeed, right? So maybe it's not like a VP of a company, but maybe it's like a senior engineer or a lead or you know, some other level of an engineer, or you know, whatever the skill set of the community that you're following, right? So if it's Techqueria, great. If it's a user group or a meetup that you go to, right? Maybe it's like a, you know, a software engineering meetup group that meets every other Friday, and they go drink beers and talk about software engineering. Like, you're surrounding yourself with other like-minded individuals that will eventually get you where you need to be. And this leads me to my next point, which is just networking. Like, eventually, if you don't find that mentor now, you will find them as long as you keep networking and talking to the right people. Um, so those are just a couple of points that I hit on. Like I said, I feel I was a little bit everywhere, but hopefully that answered your question. I see you coming in and out.
Oh, I said, yeah, you answered my
Okay.
question. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you for jumping on stage. All right, so I just want to quickly, because we're like on our last minute here, and I did want to show everybody the results of this poll. Looking at the poll, and hopefully you thought about this as we were you know, having the discussion today. So out of, it looks like, of about 30 or so votes, 10 of them mentioned that when they were kids, or when, you know, when they were told to be growing up, that they should have been doctors. So that's almost 30% of whoever answered, right, which is about almost this entire room, that were told that. So I can imagine that the numbers are, I mean, you can't really measure efficacy here, but I would argue to say that that's probably a common denominator across most families. Then the next one was lawyer, then business person, and then 13 said other, which I'm curious to find out what other skill sets, maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was something else that they were told to be growing up. But fact of the matter is, when you look at these numbers, technology and STEM, that was 3 of the votes out of 30. So that literally just proved most of what I mentioned today. In terms of when we were growing up, we weren't told to be technologists or to be in STEM careers. And so, I guess before everybody leaves here today, because I know we're like on our last minute here, the call to action that I would have for everybody is, number one, is if you're in the field and you've got a good career, you've got it going, bring others up with you. So if you're climbing the ladder, have somebody else right behind you climb that same ladder, right? Do whatever you can to help that next person, because it will help your career as well, but it will help a generation of others. So that's number one. Number two is bring tech to your families, to your communities. Start them when they're young, right? So if you've got a little sibling, maybe you've got a niece, a nephew, we need more technologists. I mean, that's just point blank, period. I mean, data suggests out there that right now there's way more jobs than there are people to fill them, qualified people to fill them. And it gets even scary when you start talking about certain groups like data science and cybersecurity, where these are critical roles to the success of our society's future. And so if we can't fill these jobs to fulfill these roles, then we got to start when you're young. And so that goes back to bringing that mentality to your family, into your community, and into your colleagues. And then lastly, and this is for my technologists out there, is diversify your background. So if you're somebody who's in technology, stick to your SME area, to your subject matter expert area, but don't forget to also become an expert in other areas, and diversify your portfolio a little bit. So anyway, I leave you with those points, and ultimately, just remember that whatever barriers that either family or society or ourselves have imposed upon them, we can overcome them. So si se puede, y vamos a mover para adelante, like how my people always say it. So other than that, appreciate everybody jumping on stage. If you'd like to connect with me afterwards, feel free to do so. My LinkedIn is on here. I believe if you go to my picture here, you might be able to find me. And I'll be more than happy to have conversations with folks outside of this. But best of luck to everybody, and enjoy the rest of the summit.